Welcome to Let's Be Frank. We decided to chat a little bit about Stoicism, which is a concept that Herman, you introduced me to actually several years ago. I hadn't heard about it until I think you bought me the Kindle version of the Daily Stoic back then. And so I got into it a little bit and I was reading my Daily Stoic on Kindle. And as we've discussed, I don't really do Kindle or Audible very well. So
Mm.
I went out and bought myself a hardcover copy of the Daily Stoic, and it's become a part of my routine. It's the first thing I do every morning. I wake up and I read my page of the day before I start journaling, and it's been really interesting and a useful journey for me. And I thought maybe it's quite cool, a cool concept to talk about because it comes up a lot in a lot of the books I've been reading. People talk about Stoicism, so let's get your take on it.
Well, um, well, as you did the introduction there and said that I'm the one responsible for you getting into it, I don't know if I'm supposed to apologize now or because it is a topic that, as you say, has become quite popular, and I suppose it is thanks largely to Ryan Holiday and the Daily Stoic and all the other work that he does around Stoicism. Um, but yeah, it's before I kind of give some of my views, can I ask a question?
Yeah.
What has it done for you?
Uh,
Well, what are some of the benefits that you got out of it?
So it's not really that it in isolation has done something for me. I think because I've been trying to expand my mind and read a lot and read these different kind of, I think the other one was the chimp paradox. I'm busy reading the happiness hypothesis and all of these things about controlling your mind and your reactions and your responses and the things that you do have control over the things that you don't. I think that's quite a big part of the Stoic philosophy is about you can only control what you can control and you need to be able to let go of the things that you can't. um,
Yeah,
and just as like a little prompt for me in the mornings, I like the way that the Daily Stoic is structured, and it just makes me think um, about how I think and how I react to situations. And so it's kind of a little prompt for a bit of internal searching or self discovery. And that's what I really like about it. I think so. One of the things I actually had written down as a point to talk about was that when you think of Stoicism, it's been given a bad rep, and you think of someone being emotionless or non reactive, which is probably a good thing, but it doesn't have a good connotation. When you say, because you talk about like a stoic silence or a stoic expression on their face, it sounds really bland and like there's
yeah,
no personality, but I don't think that that's what it's about. I don't know.
yeah. I think that that is because it is misunderstood.
Yeah.
I mean, it's what is it about? If you ask most people, I don't think they can really tell you what Stoicism is. You know, um, so just the shortest definition that I found is that it is described as a philosophy of personal ethics. And I think if we think of it in that way, then it's obviously difficult to find something wrong with it.
Yeah.
Okay. To just see it as a philosophy of personal ethics. And I think one of the reasons why it resonated with so many people is that it is non-political. It doesn't align to any religion, whatever. So it's just basically a set of principles around ethics.
Yeah.
Um, so it's also described as giving you a methodology for seeking practical wisdom in life. And I think that's what you refer to in your answer, is like um, it gives you some kind of a framework
Yeah.
to operate within.
Yeah.
So if you also go back and look at the history of Stoicism, dates from I think 3rd century BC. Zeno of Citium was about 300 BC that he came up with a philosophy. And then there's a span of about 500 years in which the philosophy became popular, and most of the writing, I think, that most people are familiar with is around the latter part of that 500 years. So we talk about, I mean, if I ask you to name a few Stoics, you're most probably going to say Seneca, you're going to say
Marcus
um,
Aurelius.
Marcus Aurelius, yes. Epictetus is the other one that
Yeah.
really comes. Cato the Younger, although he is less quoted than the rest of them. But yeah, we generally default to those three names, and they kind of in I don't know I don't know the dates exactly, but I think between 100 and 200 AD, kind of when those guys lived. So they were more prominent figures.
Yeah.
Um, and a lot of the quotes that we often refer to, etc., will kind of come from one of those guys. And then there's very little post those three guys or post that period that specifically refers to Stoicism, or at least that is popular and refers to Stoicism, to my knowledge. I don't know if you know of.
Until Ryan Holiday.
Until Ryan Holiday.
Yeah.
Well, interestingly enough,
Yeah.
there's one of the things that I recently saw or heard was somebody mentioned that Dale Carnegie's book, How to
Yes.
Stop Worrying and Start Living,
Yeah.
is very much based on Stoicism.
That was mentioned, so I'm only 2 chapters in on the happiness hypothesis, and that Dale Carnegie was mentioned. Yeah.
Okay, okay.
Yeah.
So that got me thinking that there's probably a lot of other works that have been influenced, some of the more modern works that have been influenced by the philosophy.
Yeah.
Um, and I don't know, maybe even guys like, I don't know, I'm going out on a limb here. I don't know if this is a fact or not, but Mark Manson's The Subtle Art of Not Giving a Fuck,
Mm-hmm.
whether that was not based on, because a
Yeah.
lot of the principles, a lot of the principles that we see in these things is like, hey, what's in your control? Do something about that. But what is out of your control,
Yeah.
stop wasting your time with that.
This is interesting because this is one of the things that, because I've just read the intro to this happiness hypothesis book, what this guy's done is he's gone and researched all of the ancient texts and the biblical texts and the Quran and the Torah, and he's gone through all of these things that have some kind of uh, ways for you to live your life, or methodology for a better life, or the path to happiness, or whatever it is. And he's looking for similarities that come up through all of these different ones that he's researching, and then putting together the 10 steps to happiness, or the 10
Okay.
things that'll make you happier based on where there's repetition and all these other things. And so he also has a thing with Stoicism. He says, yeah, it's great, but it's very self-focused, and relationship is part of happiness. So there's this thing where it can't just be about self. Like there has to be more than just self.
Yeah, that's true. So I was also wondering whether, like Viktor Frankl's Man's Search for Meaning, it's a
Yeah.
completely different set of circumstances. But if you look at, well, here's a journey, if you can call it a journey, a set of circumstances that I find myself in. How do I get through this?
Yeah.
And I do think that there are certain parallels there. But then I also
definitely.
think to something a lot more current and a lot more recent, although it's what 5 years old, 6 years old, or whatever, is like Jordan Peterson's 12 Rules for Life.
Yeah,
It's very, very much more modern language and something that we can relate to here. I don't know, maybe it'll take another 500 years or another 1,000 years before people start referring to that in the same way that we refer to Seneca and these guys and so on.
yeah,
And I think one of the dangers for me is that we quote these guys, and often we try to model our behavior on how on the things that they wrote,
yeah.
but they weren't necessarily good people.
Is anyone?
They did no, no. But that doesn't mean that we should all go and
Yeah,
commit suicide.
yeah,
Um, but but they did some bad shit, some really bad stuff. I mean, if anybody kind of operated today that these guys did, I'm not sure that we would take them serious.
fair
But then I
enough.
also,
Good point.
but then I also thought that, you know what, like you said, I mean, um, none of us are perfect. Um, so by the same token, would you say that apparently Gandhi also had some really dodgy habits,
Yeah,
um, and so did, I don't know, name a historical figure that people look up to, you know.
yeah,
They all had these shortcomings.
yeah,
So for me, it's just kind of circling back to what is the value that you get out of it is by reading that little piece in the morning, um, it gives you something to think about.
yeah,
And over time, you kind of collect certain of these things that resonate more with you than
yeah,
others. And that, I don't know, for whatever reason, I think you start applying more to your own life or
yeah,
to your own way of thinking. And for me, that's the real value. If we saw things in better context, I'm not sure it would have made more sense to us, or it would have um, held more value to us. But
yeah,
we see these little snippets, and it makes me think that, well, these guys were just good communicators,
yeah.
or, or at least the people who translated it into a language that we can understand were good communicators.
Yeah,
Don't you think that that is also true?
definitely. But I also think because of my reading path that I'm on now, I feel like everything I read, I interpret based on my thoughts and my feelings, and I take from it what is applicable to me. Um, so in that sense, I feel like Stoicism has it right with that it all starts with self, and you're looking at the virtues of what is it? Self control, courage, justice, and wisdom are the virtues that they say like lead to happiness, and then they work in the four disciplines, three disciplines of perception, action, and will. And so I feel like everything I read, everything I learn, I'm looking at through my eyes and applying the learnings that work for me and that are applicable to me and that help me to be the best version of myself based on what I'm consuming. Um, I've got like all these thoughts running through my head because I was also raised religiously. I was raised in a Christian household, and I think about the Bible and biblical teachings and how in sermons and in church they're applied through the eyes of the person who's teaching. So you can have two different sermons based on the exact same passage that have a
Mm,
different message for the congregation,
yeah.
or And that's one of the flaws of, I think, religion, is that it's interpreted differently by different people. Um, so there isn't like a set of rules that everyone must follow in order to be good, or there's kind of these intimations and suggestions, and then people take from it what they will.
Yeah, yeah, you said it's one of the flaws. I think it's also one of the strengths of these religions is the fact that you can take a passage and apply it in, okay, so for kind of keeping the thing alive.
Circumstantial.
And
Yeah.
yeah, and I think that that's the same thing with most philosophies or movements
Yeah.
or so if you think of Marxism, for example, I'm sure that if you go and study it, you will find some very valuable and useful things in it.
Yeah.
Overall, in the way that it was applied and so on, it's terrible.
Yeah.
Um, and I would actually go as far as saying that it also applies to political parties and their manifestos.
Yeah.
You know, if you kind of look at um, the the actual document, not that any of us really read these things at all to know what the political party's manifesto is. But anyway, my point is over a broad category, broad range of categories, you'll find these things that there are good elements in them
Yeah.
that you can take out and that you can apply. And maybe that is the only thing that we're supposed to do with these things
Yeah.
is rather than put a badge on and say, I am a so and so, um, rather look at all of these different philosophies. I think you kind of reduce it all to some kind of philosophy
Yeah.
and then go, hey, I like what these guys are doing here and I like what they're doing there. And then I apply it to me. Because I want to dig into the point that you raised earlier about you know it's all about me, me, me. But where does the rest of society or relationships and family and all of these things fit in?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts around that?
Well, my thoughts are, I'm changing them as I go, and I'm figuring it out, and it changes every day. But at the moment, I'm thinking, because I'm reading my Stoic every day, and I feel like it's making me more aware of my situations, my circumstances, and my reactions to things. I feel like if everyone had that approach, so if everyone was focused on self and what they can control and what they can't control, and that it would make the world a better place. I don't know. How do you get everyone to be aware of that?
Yeah. See, with so many of these things is if you take it to the extreme
Yeah.
of you know what, let's just tell everybody what they so the Soviets tried that. I mean, they fed a very specific narrative, and you know, one can also argue that there's a lot of it happening currently
Mm,
in terms of we are being fed a specific narrative
yeah.
that, you know, if we just all believe this, then the world will be a much better place. And that's not necessarily true
Yeah.
because we cannot get away from the me. There's always people going to say, well, it's good for you guys, but for me or for the selected group,
Yeah.
you know, we prefer something a little bit different. So there's a danger in kind of getting everybody to also think, I completely understand where you're coming from. It would just be lovely if we just all sat around the fire and sang Kumbaya and, you know, all our problems would go away. But we also know it doesn't work that way.
Yeah. So I also just finished Speculator, which I really enjoyed. I'm ready
Mhm.
for the next two in the series.
Okay.
And I got a book recommendation out of reading it. I don't know if you
Yeah.
remember. There's one point where Springer is talking to the intern and asking her about what are the worst professions in the world. You know, what are the ones that are just unforgivable? What 10 professions can you think of that are bad? And she lists a few, and he gives her some counter arguments about why those aren't the worst or aren't bad. And then he recommends that she reads Defending the Undefendable. Um, so
Oh,
I checked if it was a real book, and I put it on my Goodreads, and I thought, oh, actually, that's a really interesting book, and I'm going to add it to my list. Um, and apparently, this author goes through some of those professions, like prostitution or tax collector or this or that, and gives all of these.
mm,
And it's something I've been thinking about a lot, is that every action that people take is justifiable in some way. And so I'm learning not to judge too quickly when something happens that maybe I instantly don't agree with, or I'm trying to look at it from the perspective of how is that person justifying the action that they're taking, and what is their perspective and circumstance that makes them take that action. So I don't, it's so difficult because we're all human, we're all flawed, and none of us know what we're doing. We're all kind of figuring it out as we go.
yeah, that's 100% true. But don't you also agree that there are some actions that should not be tolerated in a society? And then, whether you so um, something just recently cropped up somewhere in my Twitter feed is some pedophile that is um, the court case is going on and they're expecting the person to be sentenced. So like something like that, in my opinion, I couldn't really. I don't want to spend any time
Yeah,
thinking about how do you justify that.
yeah,
So, and I think if we start making a list of some of those actions, it will actually become quite a long list
yeah,
of, well, you know, especially if it harms other individuals or other people. Do we really want to put ourselves in the shoes of those people, etc.? Now, I'm not talking about wars, and I'm not talking about revolutions, etc.,
mm,
etc. You know, I'm talking about murder, that sort of thing. So, so yes, we've got to try and understand what caused those reactions and what led to them. What is that person's circumstances and so on, but not to the point where it becomes an excuse
yeah,
for suffering because somebody else is, I don't know, clearly has a problem.
yeah,
Um, but that it is difficult to kind of, where's that me? Because also we were brought up to not be selfish.
yeah.
Just like one of the worst things that they could have taught us, don't you think?
Yep. Well, I've been on a journey of selfishness for a long time, and I am finally really comfortable with being selfish and putting myself first, and making sure that I'm in a good space before I care about everyone else. And I think that that's been a really positive change in my life, was getting to the point where I'm actually more selfish.
Good. So that leads to another book recommendation. I don't know if but have you read Ayn Rand's work?
No, but it's obviously come up a lot in Speculator. And when I was reading some of the reviews of Speculator, a lot of people said reminds me of Ayn Rand, or so.
Yeah. So I would suggest you start with The Fountainhead
Okay.
because it was written before Atlas Shrugged. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
Atlas Shrugged is obviously, if you ask anybody who's aware or has read anything, you must obviously read Atlas
Yeah.
Shrugged. But start with Fountainhead.
Yeah.
I read it the other way around. I first read
Okay.
Atlas Shrugged. Um, so, anyway, there are also some essays published about Ayn Rand's views of selfishness,
Okay.
of and what it really means.
She's not
And I
very
found that
popular
used.
on Goodreads.
No, I can imagine.
Yeah.
But also, if you want to, I recommend you just go on YouTube and find some of her interviews and so
Yeah.
on, and try and understand. That'll give you a better understanding of her as a person
Yeah.
and so
So
on.
part of my reading journey now is I'm also learning to ignore people's recommendations and all the stars on books on Goodreads,
Okay,
because I feel like I get something different out of it too. I haven't given any of the books I've read less than a 4 star myself, because I feel like even the ones that I don't 100% agree with, whatever, I'm learning something from and it's giving me something. So um, yeah, like I say, I searched Ayn Rand on Goodreads, and
okay.
there's a lot of 1 star, like really passionate reviews about some of the things that she says. But yeah, I'm gonna read it anyway.
Yeah, it's interesting. I wonder if you have to um, go back after you've read, I don't know, 100 books,
Yeah,
and you have to go and review books that you've read.
yeah,
Or I sometimes think that books that I thought were really good and valuable, um, 5 years later, do I still have the opinion
okay,
similar? And I've definitely changed my mind about
yeah,
some of it.
yeah,
Um, Whereas at the time, and I think that that's the point that you're trying to make here, is that at the time, in where you are in your journey, etc., um, it has had a positive effect, and you got some value out of it,
yeah,
and then it's fine. I think if you, um, not to plug Ayn Rand too much, but I think if you go and look at what those people who gave her 1 stars, what they studied, and what their political
yeah,
affiliation is, it will definitely give you a
and
much better clue of where
yeah,
they
and the books that they ranked as 5 stars in comparison.
are. Yes, yes,
Yeah,
yes, yes. That's
yeah.
also a very good one. Yeah.
um, So, do you still feel like you maybe need to apologize for introducing me to Stoicism?
No, I don't feel I should apologize. One of my all-time favorite quotes is a Seneca quote.
Yeah,
We suffer more in imagination than in reality.
yeah,
So I definitely think that there's a lot of value. I think as with any other philosophy, don't just buy the Daily Stoic and put your blinkers on,
yeah,
and don't look at any other philosophy or find value in things outside of that. I think that they can and should complement
yeah,
and not become a very narrow-minded, like that's the only thing that you're allowed to read, or the only thing that you or the only philosophy that you should think about.
yeah,
Just one last point about Stoicism, which I think is also important, is that I think during the time that Stoicism was developed as a philosophy, there was a lot of slavery around in the world.
yeah,
I mean, Epictetus, I think, if I remember correctly, Epictetus was a slave
yeah,
himself. Um, and a lot of it is, you can kind of look at it through that lens of, you know, this would make a lot of sense for a slave to adopt this philosophy
yeah,
versus where we are much freer society now. The ethical principles definitely, I think, still applicable, and that's remarkable. You think about it, whereas there's a lot of movements at the moment, which is kind of trying to redefine ethics,
Yeah.
um, and how we should live and kind of treat each other as societies or nations or people. Um, Whereas, wow, here's something that has really withstood the test of time, that has kind of gone through, a couple of centuries, and it's still valid, um, and can provide a lot of value and guidance to modern people.
Yeah. No, I agree with all of that, and I think that that's the point, the good point that you made, that don't let it be the only thing that you read or that you follow. Or I think that that's
Yeah,
important for everything. And we've been talking a lot about bias and how do you know what's true. And I think that part of the way of figuring out what's true and what's real is to read more than just one source and find out more than just one person's perspective or one, I don't know, news agent's perspective or whatever it is. Um, so yeah, I like that. I'm really enjoying my daily Stoic, and like I say, it's a really good prompt for me in the morning to read my day, the page of the day, which
yeah.
takes me 2 minutes, read my page, and then start my journaling, which is the things I'm grateful for and what I plan to do that day. Um, so yeah, I think it's been a really good uh, addition to my life, understanding Stoicism a little bit and reading a bit about it. I really liked today's one. I don't know if you read it. It was a good one.
No, not yet.
A productive use for contempt. So uh, it's something different because you don't ever think that contempt is a good thing, but
Mm.
this is giving you an example of when contempt is a good thing or how to use contempt for good. So yeah, I actually just
Don't you?
bought one of these for a friend of mine.
So don't you think? Sorry, just one
Yeah,
last point about
go
it.
for it.
The Because it's obviously the Daily Stoic, start on January 1, and there's a little passage for every day, and it is kind of this group by certain
Yeah,
topics per month.
yeah,
Um, and when you start with it, the first time that you read it, it's obviously great to kind of follow it on the actual date that you are. But I think there's also value in looking at the topics and
yeah,
deciding, well, this is where I am. I need a little bit of guidance, and I need a little bit of help in terms of organizing my thoughts and so on
yeah,
around a specific topic, and then start reading that particular month,
yeah. That's probably
whether
a really
it's,
good idea.
yeah.
Yeah, so they've separated it into the three disciplines. So there's three parts: perception, action,
Hmm.
and will. Um, so the first 4 months of the year are perception, then action, then will. And then within that, it's broken down into, so January's clarity, February's passions and emotions, March is awareness, and April is unbiased thought. Um, and and then every day is a quote from one of the Stoics
Yeah.
to do with that topic. But yeah, I like that idea of maybe when you feel like you need some guidance in a specific area to go and read that month. I think
Yeah,
when I
yeah.
started,
No,
when you gave me the Kindle version, I just started reading from January and just read a few pages a day, and I wasn't really following it on the day. But now,
okay.
because I'm using it as a journal prompt in the morning, I'm reading the day and then going from there. And I've also mentioned
Yeah.
to you, I think there's quite a bit of space at the bottom of the days. I thought maybe I should get a pencil and write 2023. This is how I feel about
Yes.
it this year. And when I read it again next year, maybe I'll read it and have a different feeling about it, and I'll put that thought down. So that
I
might
think
be my
that's a
next
great
step.
idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that that's a really good idea to also kind of see how your growth and how you evolve as a person, and your thinking evolves over time.
Yeah. Cool. Well, thank you
Great.
for this chat about Stoicism, which was more about lots of different thoughts, but I've really enjoyed it, and it's always good to get different people's perspectives and thoughts about it. And thank you for introducing me to Stoicism, but then also giving me reasons why I should look at other things too. um, we'll chat again soon. Thank you.
Thanks, Ali.